Historically, the term estuary is the lower reaches of river where she meets with the sea. An estuary can be variously defined. It has been described as the arm of the sea, a firth, narrow passage, or the mouth of the river or lake, where tides meet the current. Webster's New 20th Century Dictionary. Emery and Stevenson, 1957, consider an estuary is the wide mouth of the river, or arm of the sea, where tides meet the current of river. According to Ketchum, 1951, an estuary may be defined as a body of water in which river water mixes with measurably dilute sea water. But from this definition, estuary and lagoons cannot be differentiated. A more convincing definition is given by Pritchard, 1967. An estuary is a semi-enclosed water body which has a free connection with the open sea and within which seawater is measurably diluted with fresh water derived from land drainage. Estuaries are typically the tidal mouths of rivers. Eestus is Latin for tide, and they are often characterized by sedimentation or silt carried in from terrestrial runoff and, frequently, from offshore. They are made up of brackish water. Estuaries are often given names like bay, sound, fjord, etc. The terms are not mutually exclusive. Classification of estuary. Geomorphological classification of estuary. 1. Drowned river valleys. These are classical estuaries, most commonly found along a coastline with a relatively wide coastal plain. Pritchard, 1967, designated these waterways as coastal plain estuaries. The estuary proper in a drowned river valley extends seawards up to the point where seawater is measurably diluted and riverwards up to the point where there is measurable amount of salts derived from sea. As one proceeds from the end to the head of the river, the salinity of river decreases 30 to 0.1. Many drowned river valley estuaries were formed between about 15,000 and 6,000 years ago following the end of the Wisconsin-Ordovician glaciation, when an static rise in sea level of 100 meters to 130 meters flooded river valleys that were cut into the landscape when sea level was lower, creating the estuarine systems. Additionally, the general subsidence of coastal regions contributed to the development of drowned river valleys. Well-developed drowned river valleys are generally found on coastlines with low, wide coastal plains. Their width-to-depth ratio is typically large, appearing wedge-shaped in the inner part and broadening and deepening seaward. Water depths rarely exceed 30 meters. Examples of this type of estuary include the Chesapeake Bay and Delaware Bay, along the U.S. mid-Atlantic coast, and along the U.S. Gulf Coast, Galveston Bay and Tampa Bay. 2. Fjords. Fjord-type estuaries are formed in deeply eroded valleys formed by glaciers. These U-shaped estuaries typically have steep sides, rocks bottoms, and underwater sills contoured by glacial movement. The shallowest area of the estuary occurs at the mouth, where terminal glacial deposits or rock bars form sills that restrict water flow. In the upper reaches of the estuary, the depth can exceed 300 meters. The width-to-depth ratio is generally small. When estuaries contain very shallow sills, tidal oscillations only affect near-surface waters to sill depth, and waters below sill depth may remain stagnant for very long periods of time, resulting in only an occasional exchange of the deep water of the estuary with the ocean. If the sill depth is deep, water circulation is less restricted and a slow, but steady exchange of water from the estuary and the ocean occur. Fjord-type estuaries can be found along the coasts of Alaska, eastern Canada, Greenland, Iceland, New Zealand, and Norway. No fjords occur in India. 3. Bar-built estuaries. These estuaries are semi-isolated from ocean waters by barrier beaches, barrier islands and barrier spits. Formation of barrier beaches partially encloses the estuary with only narrow inlets allowing contact with the ocean waters. Bar-built estuaries typically develop on gently sloping plains located along tectonically stable edges of continents and the marginal sea coasts. They are extensive along the Atlantic and Gulf coasts of the U.S. in areas with active coastal deposition of sediments and where tidal ranges are less than 4 meters. The barrier beaches that enclose bar-built estuaries have been developed in several ways. 1. Upbuilding of offshore bars from wave action, in which sand from the seafloor is deposited in elongate bars parallel to the shoreline. 2. Reworking of sediment discharge from rivers by wave, current, and wind action into beaches, overwash flats, and dunes. 3. Engulfment of mainland beach ridges developed from the erosion of coastal plain sediments approximately 5,000 years ago, due to sea level rise and resulting in the breaching of the ridges and flooding of the coastal lowlands, forming shallow lagoons. 4. Elongation of barrier spits from the erosion of headlands, with the spit growth occurring in the direction of the littoral drift due to the action of longshore currents. Barrier beaches form in shallow water and are generally parallel to the shoreline, resulting in long, narrow estuaries. The average water depth is usually less than 5 meters, and rarely exceed 10 meters. Examples of bar-built estuaries include Barnegat Bay, New Jersey, Laguna Madre, Texas, and Pamlico Sound, North Carolina. 4. Estuaries produced by tectonic process. These estuaries are formed by subsidence or land cut off from the ocean by land movement associated with faulting, volcanoes, and landslides. Inundation from static sea level rise during the Holocene epoch has also contributed to the formation of these estuaries. There are only a small number of tectonically produced estuaries. One example is the San Francisco Bay, which was formed by the crustal movements of the San Andreas Fault system causing the inundation of the lower reaches of the Sacramento and San Joaquin rivers. 5. Canyon mouth. Emergent portions of the Southern California coastline are characterized by a series of incised, parallel canyons, arroyos or barrancas, and valleys that drain watersheds in mountain, foothill, coastal plain, and coastal mesa landscapes. These various canyons empty into the ocean through small estuaries. Those are quite variable in size, frequency of tidal flushing, salinity regimes, and biota. 6. Estuaries with large areas of subtidal habitat, bays, and low-elevation salt marsh on the bay margins are another major type of estuary.